Welcome to basketballnews.com's NBA Free Agency Show. We are here to talk about all of the moves that happened this week, also talk about some of the free agents that are left on the board. I'm joined by Evan Sidery and Tommy Beer. What's up, guys? How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Good,
Well,
good. So, Evan and I have been here the last few days talking about everything that happened. Tommy, this is your first time on this week, so I want to get your thoughts on some of the big teams. But we have to start with your New York Knicks, who added Kemba Walker. We also saw, them re-sign a number of their players, bring up, but also add Evan Fournier. What are your thoughts on what the Knicks have done in free agency? I've seen you tweet about it a little bit, but I'm curious. Where do you stand in all this?
Sure. It's probably good that I wasn't on the first 2 days because my reaction would have been dramatically different. I think Kemba definitely changes the complexion of the off season. We also got some updated information on the salary structure of the contracts that Fournier, Nerlens Noel, and Alex Burke signed. I saw a Zach Lowe tweet earlier today that each of those guys has a team option for the final year of those contracts. So obviously, Nerlens Noel for a $10 million a year and Burks at $10 million a year isn't. I certainly wouldn't call that a team-friendly contract. Not a terrible contract, but it was the length of those contracts which I thought was troublesome or worrisome from a Knick perspective. So having that final year chopped off. Gives the Knicks a lot more flexibility, not only in their own cap going forward, but should a player like Lillard or Beal or somebody demand a trade, it's a lot easier to trade guys when they have that final year as a team option. As of at the end of free agency, the Knicks will, on an opening night of this season in October, the Knicks will have the only player that'll have guaranteed salary extend beyond the 22-23 season is Fournier, and he'll have just 1 year left on that 4-year deal. So there's just I'm sorry, he has a 3-year deal too. So I think that they won't have any player beyond 2023. So there's just a lot to that's a good news. And then obviously the news of the day is Kemba Walker. As you noted, I've tweeted out some stats. I've seen a lot of people say that he's washed or that that this is not a good player. Listen, in terms of production, the guy's made the All-Star game 4 of the past 5 years. In a down season last year, he averaged 19.5, shot almost 40% from three, on a high percentage. So there's just if the Knicks were going to trade for his contract with the $72 million left, then you'd have major issues. I certainly wouldn't suggest that the team did that. But the fact that he received the buyout from OKC, is coming to New York, they're going to sign him with their cap space remaining, probably about $8.59 million. It's just a no-brainer from a Knicks perspective. You obviously upgrade the point guard position, and it's just one of those low-risk, high-reward. He's a New York City point guard. A good locker room guy, brings experience. So just a lot to like from that perspective. And I think having Derrick Rose and Kemba both on the same team, they can kind of function as a combination. It'll enable both those guys to have their minutes limited, probably play 22 to 25 minutes a night, give them some nights off. You have IQ quickly as a backup. I think with the updated information on the contracts of the 3 guys they did sign, and then adding Kemba, because the one thing they were missing was a starting point guard, obviously, and Kemba Walker, even a diminished version of himself, is a massive upgrade from Elfrid Payton. So the Knicks are going to run it back with pretty much the same lineup intact, and now you replace Elfrid Payton with Kemba Walker, a guy who's on a bad year can average 20 points a game. For a team that finished 10 games over 500, I think that's not a grand slam, certainly not a home run for the Knicks for the offseason, but a lot better than it was 18 hours ago, and probably a passing grade right now.
Yeah, I saw a lot of Knicks fans were frustrated that there was no point guard, that, it seemed like they weren't addressing that position. So the fact they were able to go get Kemba Walker on a deal that you mentioned is pretty low risk, high reward. $8 million for a guy of that caliber makes a lot of sense. Evan was already a fan of the Knicks moves before they even added Kemba. He felt like replacing, Reggie Bullock with Evan Fournier was an upgrade, and that bringing back that continuity was a big, game changer for them. So now that we see Kemba Walker also in New York, what are your thoughts on that, Evan?
I like it. I think, like you mentioned, Alex, it just adds even more to the winners category for me. I know and the flexibility now, Tommy, that you mentioned, Zach Lowe mentioned with the team options in the final years for Noel and Burks, and obviously Evan Fournier is fourth year's team option as well. You keep that flexibility down the road, but I like running it back a little because this Knicks team was the 4th seed in the East last year. You expect the jump from RJ Barrett next year, Emmanuel quickly. You get anything from Obi Toppin next year, that'd be a big bonus as well. But I love Evan Fournier's fit alongside RJ Barrett and Julius Randle in New York. I like Nerlens Noel and Mitchell Robinson as a duo at center. I mean, Tommy, what do you think about Evan Fournier? I know I might be higher on him than most, but what's your opinion of Fournier in New York?
Yeah, no, I'm a high on him as well. You know, the Knicks. I think one of the things you have to be concerned about from a Knicks perspective is there's going to be you have to almost assume there's going to be a little bit of a regression to the mean from Randall. You know, it's a guy that shot 27% from 3-point land in 1920, and then last season shot over 41%. So let's say he lands somewhere in 37%, territory. Barrett also obviously exceeded expectations from, he was an inefficient scorer as a rookie, certainly increased his efficiency as a sophomore. So they needed more on the players that can, not only catch and shoot, which Fournier can do, but he's also a shot creator. We saw, especially in the Hawks series, when kind of the game just settled down in that half-court set, the Knicks had a tough time getting buckets. So Fournier is definitely a guy that you can do. We know that he's played in big pressure situations before. His numbers with Orlando in the postseason aren't overly encouraging. But as we saw in the game against the United States, when he was arguably the best player on the floor, against a legit team in Team USA for France, that he can put up big numbers in big spots. He's still, you're buying the heart of his prime. He's 20 years old, so you get it's just 28, 29, 30, age 31 seasons. So yeah, I'm a fan of it. I don't think it was a phenomenal deal, or one of the best deals in free agency, but I thought it definitely made sense from the Knicks perspective. And again, having that 4th year as a team option is certainly kind of a cherry on top.
So I guess now that we've seen, all the Knicks kind of moves happen, what are your thoughts on, your projection for this team in the standings? Do you think they got better? Where would you say, you have the Knicks going to next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. Had they not added a starting point guard of Kemba's quality, and again, the reason to be optimistic on Kemba is when he's played very well. He's a high, he's a great pick and roll player. Evan had mentioned Mitchell Robinson return. That's another huge factor. And I tweeted about it earlier. There were 5 players on the Knicks last year to log more than 1,400 minutes. 2 of those 5 were Nerlens Noel and Elfrid Payton. So now you're wiping away those 1,400 minutes that Elf played last year, and you're giving those to either Kemba Walker or Derrick Rose, maybe some IQ minutes in there. And then Nerlens Noel certainly played well, good defensive player, but at times the Knicks are 4 and 5. He has difficulty catching the ball, finishing around the rim, whereas Mitchell Robinson really stretches the floor vertically. You can just really see him and Kemba, becoming a dynamic, pick and roll combo that should benefit both of their games. So while I was, kind of assuming that there would be a little bit of a regression, like I said, this was a team that finished 10 games over 500, really exceeded. Vegas had them, I think, at 22.5 was their over/under number, so they almost doubled that. So you just kind of almost assume, if they ran the same team back in the non-funky COVID year, that they'd probably be around the 40-win 500 team. I think Kemba kind of changes that dynamic a little bit, so I think they have a chance to kind of match, finish plus 10 over 500 and that plus 8 to 12 over 500 if Kemba stays healthy, if Mitch Robinson stays healthy. In that outside of the top 3, that top tier of Eastern Conference teams, I think they can fight for that 4, 5, 6. But there also is some downside. Does Julius Randle come crashing back down to earth? Does the upward trajectory of RJ Barrett's career and his offensive efficiency kind of level out or plateau a little bit? Does Kemba stay healthy? Does Derrick Rose stay healthy? Alex Burks has never been particularly durable. So there's certainly questions there. There's a downside there. I wouldn't be shocked if they finish below 500. But I think they have pieces in place well-coached team. Garden will be loud. Knicks fans will be excited. So there's reason to be optimistic. They could at least match last year's production, kind of, positive record.
We're getting a few comments here about Miami. We talked a little about Miami the last few days. We kind of shared our thoughts on Lowry and some of the moves that they made. Thoughts from you, Tommy, on this Heat team. We saw them bring in Kyle Lowry, PJ Tucker, Markieff Morris. They've made, a lot of different moves. I think going into the offseason, people weren't really expecting them to be this active, but, they really have a whole new look there. What are your thoughts on this Miami team and just how good they can be?
Credit to Miami, man. Pat Riley. I mean, it's really unbelievable. He's had like 15 different incarnations of that Miami Heat team, from when they first started, and then the Dion Waiters disaster, and everything they've kind of gone through, and then for them to be back in a position where they'll be knocking on that top tier door with the Bucks, the Nets, and the Sixers next year. I like what they did. Lowry's 35, but definitely a winner. And I thought kind of the key, kind of the linchpin that kind of tied everything together for Miami was adding PJ Tucker. They needed a power forward. They added Morris as well. But I've been a huge fan of Tucker for a long time. I thought he was, when the Bucks traded for him, I thought that was an essential addition. As we know, it turned out to be important contribute on a championship team. And they have plenty of scorers, obviously, with Butler and company, and Lowry obviously in the fold now. And now you had PJ Tucker, a guy that's just going to do the dirty work. Obviously plays the kind of style that Coach Spo wants those guys to play down there. I like what Miami did. Probably a little bit of an overpay for Kyle Lowry, considering he's 35 and he's going to be making $30 million a year when he's 38. But again, he's a winner. You can't have enough of those guys on your roster. We'll see how it kind of plays out. We'll see if Tyler Hero can bounce back. Certainly some questions, but overall, I like what Miami did.
Honestly, Oh, go ahead, Alex.
I would say one shocking move today too was re-signing Victor Oladipo on a minimum contract, which is kind of crazy to think about. A year ago, if you told someone that Oladipo was going to get a minimum deal when he's turning down $25 million a year extensions, pretty wild. But just want to throw that in there too. Go ahead, Evan.
No, yeah, Victor Oladipo is what I was going to mention too. You get him back on a 1-year deal, very cheap as well. And this team really fits Miami's identity, just that Heat culture we all know about. Lowry, Oladipo midseason, if he returns, is a huge bonus. That could be like their sort of pseudo trade deadline move. Jimmy Butler, PJ Tucker, Bam Adebayo in their bench, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Markieff Morris, and Dwayne Dedmon. That's a really solid 9-man rotation there. And I know Alex Spencer has mentioned it on the stream throughout this week that he's really high on Miami's championship hopes, but I feel like they're really solidly in that number 3 spot in the East right now behind Brooklyn and Milwaukee. I really like what Miami has done, though. They've definitely improved since this free agency career has started.
Yeah. One thing on Oladipo, Barry Jackson, Miami Herald reported today, was a tweet a little while ago, that while Oladipo thinks he could be playing by January, February, there's people in the Heat organization that believe he won't return till March. So it seems like there's a decent chance that he's that injury is a lot worse than kind of we suspected. It was pretty bad, but it could keep him out for a full calendar year. So that's certainly concerning.
Yeah, one interesting thing on Oladipo, his doctor that did the most recent surgery said that he's stunned that Oladipo was able to play at all because I guess this is a second quad surgery, I think, in like 28 months. So the first one apparently was botched, and the surgeon said that the first guy did a horrible job, and he's surprised he was able to play at all. So the fact that he was able to average 20 points per game in Houston on this botched quad, maybe we can see this heal correctly after that surgery was kind of messed up, and he gets back to, even if he's not the all NBA player we saw in Indiana, if he's 70% of that, then that's huge for Miami on a minimum contract. I do want to talk about Lamarcus Aldridge because that news dropped today that he is basically consulted with doctors and talking about returning and resuming his NBA career. One of the shocking stories of this past season was his retirement from the Brooklyn Nets because of the heart condition that he had. So the fact that he's now possibly coming out of retirement to sign with the team, you'd have to imagine Brooklyn would be at the front of that list trying to bring him back because, obviously they valued him pretty highly last year. A number of teams, though, were going after LaMarcus whenever he was available, on the open market during last season. So what are your guys' thoughts on LaMarcus Aldridge and the possibility that we'll see him play again?
I think with Aldridge, it's really interesting because he's a player that throughout his career until maybe 1 or 2 years ago, he wasn't expanding his range to three-pointers. And now he's consistently, I think, above 35, 36% from three. And adding him to your rotation as a second unit piece would really be a huge boom for someone like Brooklyn or even the Lakers or the Clippers or Miami, like someone in the comments mentioning as well. I think those are some really solid fits for Aldridge. And if he's only like a 15 to 20 minute per game role, it makes a lot of sense to bring him on board for a veteran's minimum. But I imagine Aldridge at this point, when he went to Brooklyn, he got bought up by San Antonio. He wants to get that ring. So I imagine Brooklyn's probably the top of the list, like you mentioned, Alex.
Yeah, it's interesting. He had talked about wanting to win a championship and how hard it was for him to retire. So if any doctor is clearing him, I'm sure that, he would love to come back. The question is, will a team's doctor, also clear him? That was the kind of the Chris Bosh thing that we saw, where Bosh was able to go to a bunch of different doctors and find one or two that was willing to say, yeah, you can play. But every NBA team's doctor was saying, no, we can't risk this. It's a heart condition or it's a pulmonary embolism thing. It's life or death. So with a heart issue, I'm sure it'd be kind of similar where, will a team doctor actually clear him? And every team's doctors are different. We see that during the draft process too, where certain teams red flag a guy and say, you can't pick him. Other teams say, no, we can make this work. So, if he does want to go to some teams, that could be another hurdle to kind of go over if they're concerned about the heart issue. So we'll see if he can kind of get past that. But I guess what did you guys see from Aldridge last year as far as what he can still bring to a team and how he can contribute still in the NBA? Because I think he'd still be a huge pickup. I think if he is able to come back immediately, he's the best free agent available right now. That doesn't really say a ton because not a lot of guys are still remaining on the board, but he's definitely a difference maker, I would say. Do you guys think he could actually be, a great addition for a team if he's able to come back?
Yeah, I think a great addition might be a stretch, but definitely,
Sure.
he is what is he going to be? He's 36 years old now. But he's definitely a veteran. He's had certainly time to rest and kind of recuperate. And I think Evan brought up another point that's important to note is I'm just looking now from 2020, 2019, 2020. So last 79 games he's appeared in. That's over the past two seasons. He shot 38.8% from three-point land. On decent volume. Looks like he averaged 3 attempts a game. So that's a guy that he's going to be able to give you buckets in the post.
Yeah.
He's done that his whole career. Very crafty, great footwork. I guess the thing you have to worry about with him is defensively. Teams are going to try to exploit him in the pick and roll. It's tough to hide guys. Some of those slow-footed bigs. In kind of the modern day NBA. When Aldridge was really at his prime, 10 years ago, it's almost like a different game in terms of pick and rolls and 3-point shots and everything like that. So, I definitely think it's every team that's a contender will be interested. I guess you have to assume Brooklyn's the favorite, seeing that they developed a relationship. So we'll see how it plays itself out.
He did have some big games with Brooklyn. I think he played, 5 games with the Nets before having to retire. And, they're not huge games, but, his debut was 11 points, 11 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals. He had another 11-point game, 22 points, 2 blocks. His last game was 12 points, 3 blocks. He actually had, either 2 or 3 blocks in 4 out of 5 games. So, a little bit different than the Lamarcus that we're used to seeing, but he was blocking a lot of shots, getting steals, obviously still scoring the ball, rebounding. And that's when he was still getting acclimated to a new team, trying to learn everything. So pretty interesting. If he is available, he could potentially, provide some front court depth for one of these teams. We're seeing a lot of people in the chat right now talk about, different fits for him and what he can bring to a team. Someone mentioned the Celtics. Someone mentioned the Lakers here. Someone mentioning the Heat. Let's go. Let's throw them all up here.
I wonder if he'd consider reuniting with Dame in Portland too.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the ones here too. Always wanted to retire a Blazer. So pretty interesting. He'll have plenty of options. He's certainly someone to keep an eye on, in this free agency. We also there's not a ton of guys that are still available. Let's see. I'm going to pull up the list now to see who's still available. If anyone has questions about, different free agents or any certain situation, then we can definitely get into them. But I do want to talk about some of the top free agents that are remaining. If you look at the list, it's guys like Dennis Schroeder, Reggie Jackson, Danny Green, Lou Williams, Wes Matthews, JJ Redick, Elfrid Payton, Langston Galloway. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard is still out there, but he's signing with the Clippers. I would be stunned if he went to another team. Kelly Oubre, Andre Iguodala, Josh Hart, Justice Winslow, Jared Vanderbilt, DeAndre Bembry, Let's see, Lauri Markkanen, Paul Millsap, Lamarcus Aldridge, as we just talked about, Kem Birch, Aaron Baines, DeMarcus Cousins, Frank Kaminsky, Bismack Biyombo, Ed Davis, Willie Hernan-Gomez. So just to kind of go through some of the names that are still on the board. Again, there's not a ton of guys in there that are going to be huge contributors next year. I think the big guys that jump out are, Schroeder, Kelly Oubre, some guys that are kind of surprised they're still on the board.
Where is Schroeder going to land, man? With the Knicks getting Kemba Walker, he is in deep doo-doo.
It's crazy.
The music has run out, and everyone's sitting in the chair, and Schroeder and his agent are in a corner like, dude, what happened?
Yeah, especially thinking that he turned down that, $85 million extension during the season. Like, he's kicking himself right now. If he ends up taking either a mid-level type deal or a minimum deal somewhere, that's brutal.
I guess his best option now is to do a 1-year deal, hope and re-enter 22. What I was thinking about was the Nerlens Noel disaster. Remember when Mavs offered him 4 years and $70 million or something when he was with Dallas? He declined it and then came back. And Shams just tweeted, Dinwiddie headed to the Wizards on a 3-year, $62 million deal via sign and trade. So I think we all knew that. I think those numbers were reported as well.
Yeah, so that we were kind of waiting on, I guess, all the components of the sign and trade. There was supposedly, it kept growing to more and more teams. So I didn't throw him on that list just now because Dinwiddie is committed to Washington, but good to see it's finally done. And hopefully pretty soon here we get the details on, what's in that sign and trade, who else is being moved around. But it's crazy. The Schroeder situation, we talked about it, the last 2 days here. Just, it's kind of shocking to see, how little interest he's received. And you would think that one of these teams that needs a point guard would have come to the table, but like you said, there were just so many other options available. I'm curious. I'm guessing you're right. He's going to take a 1-year deal somewhere, hope he plays out of his mind, but the problem is next offseason is loaded with star free agents. So he's not one of the guys that's going to be near the top of the board for any team. So it's a brutal situation for him. People are talking about, does he go to the Sixers on an Andre Drummond type deal, like a small deal, play 1 year, hope he can go deep in the playoffs and prove himself because they need a point guard. I'm just not sure what other spots are out there. Evan, what do you think about this whole situation and where he could potentially land?
Yeah, I think one to watch out for that could make some sense. We've heard a lot of noise about Goran Dragic ending up here if he does leave Toronto, but Dallas might make some sense for shooters to take some playmaking and scoring pressure off of Luka Doncic, maybe even Toronto themselves to pair with Fred VanVleet. But outside of those two teams, I really don't see an option unless, like you said, a Philadelphia type of deal that need more playmaking creation alongside Embiid. It's crazy because Dennis Schroeder, like you mentioned, was at $484, I think was the extension he was offering. He declined that, and now he's in a situation where he might be taking a mid-level exception type of deal or even a taxpayer mid-level exception. Just a huge fall from grace for Schroeder where I think he overpriced himself and team just thought he wasn't worth it.
Yeah. By the way, I mentioned Kem Birch in that list. He's actually re-signed with Toronto, so that's my bad. That was an older list, I guess, that I was looking at. Shout out to Reed Report for correcting that. You're correct. Let's see. People are asking about different teams. Someone said Boston needs a point guard. I think, was it Jake Fisher yesterday that said that Schroeder to Boston wasn't really an option? I want to say he mentioned something like that. So it seems like he's not an option there, but it's interesting. I think once we know more about this Kyle Lowry sign and trade, is Goran Dragic going to be bought out and land in Dallas? If not, maybe Schroeder goes there. We also know New Orleans they've shown interest in Dragic, so maybe if they don't land him, do they pivot and try to go with Dennis Schroeder? But not a great position for him to be in. The other guy is Kelly Oubre. We talked about this yesterday, but his camp was talking with the Warriors about possible sign and trades. So I know they're exploring different teams there. So, maybe Oubre won't have to end up on a minimum contract or a team, part of a team's mid-level if he's able to get a sign and trade somewhere. But looking around the league too, it's hard to find a real destination for Oubre. I know he was really hoping that some team was going to still pay because he's 25 years old. Some team was going to pay him based on his potential. That obviously hasn't been the case. So, here we go. We do have the details of the sign and trade. The Wizards are sending a second-round pick and a draft swap to Brooklyn to acquire Spencer Dinwiddie. So actually pretty basic, not that bad. I know people were saying it was growing and involving multiple teams. I wonder if maybe there will be more teams eventually.
I think we can take from that is that the Nets weren't interested in either Kuzma, which is, I guess kind of surprising, depending, or another team to reroute it.
That's what Jake Fisher had told us here. He had said they're not interested in Montrezl Harrell or Kyle Kuzma. So the thought was the deal wouldn't be able to happen unless they included a third or fourth team to get involved and take one of those guys. But it sounds like, I know at one point the Nets were asking for Danny Avdija and some other players, but which is pretty bold. But apparently they were willing to settle for a second round pick and a draft swap. So pretty interesting. I know that, Spencer Dinwiddie's happy somewhere because he was really hoping to get to Washington, and now he gets his big contract and gets to go to Washington. So pretty interesting that Brooklyn didn't get more there.
Agreed. And that's kind of a tough pill for Brooklyn to swallow because they don't have a lot of avenues to add quality depth. That one kind of thing Net fans hoped going into the offseason. They added Patty Mills, brought back Bruce Brown, but the one kind of hope was that they could add a real contributor, a significant rotation player, either biting the luxury tax line and re-signing him, or getting somebody back in a 3-year trade. The one other thing with the Dinwiddie deal, I think it kind of highlights because he's making over $20 million a year now. Lowry's making over $30 million. Dinwiddie's coming off a torn ACL, and is getting $20 million a year, whereas Lowry's going to get around $8 million a year, and it's dealing with some arthritis, obviously, but just kind of speaks to the value of that next contract.
I think the Wizards, honestly, we were talking about this earlier in the week, Alex, but now you only give up a second-round pick and a pick swap for Spencer Dinwiddie. This Wizards team actually looks really nice on paper. I know they're not going to be a true title contender or there's someone that goes deep into the playoffs, but I like the team they built around Bradley Beal. Just a lot of shooting, a lot of versatility. Spencer Dinwiddie's a great fit alongside Bradley Beal. A lot of young guys as well. I think this Wizards team could be a 6 or 7 seed in the East this year.
Yeah, it's a good point. Everyone wants to talk about the Bradley Beal situation. We've heard of it, for 2 years now. Every fan base is just hoping that Beal requests out so they can steal him away. But props to the Wizards for, making some good moves there and surrounding him with some talent. I know he's close with Dinwiddie too. That was kind of the rumor that Dinwiddie wanted to go there because they're good friends. So I'm sure he's happy about that move. We'll see what happens here. Some people are asking about, Tommy, go ahead. You want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I just think I'm kind of in between because on one sense, I think Dinwiddie's an underrated player. Assuming he comes back healthy, which, a partial ACL tear is certainly not, career threatening with today's science and doctors and everything. So I think he's definitely worth the money. I think he's an underrated player. You look at his production in the last 2 or 3 years, the guy is legit. So I think it's a good move. The only thing from a Wizards perspective, does this put them on the perpetual 7th, 8th, 6th, 10th seed, kind of the worst place to be in the NBA where they're not good enough to tank. They're not good enough to, even compete for a second round, Eastern Conference finals, let alone an NBA championship. I think the other take home point is, but they've surrounded them. They got drafted Kispert. He can play. He can shoot. Kuzma, KCP's a solid addition. They got good depth. Daniel Gafford gave him great minutes the end of last season in the middle. They got Harold down there. Maybe Bryant comes back around February. They have good center depth. I definitely think they can compete for that 7th, 8th seed, which means it's unlikely that they're bad enough for Beal to demand a trade. That could prevent one of those kind of big player dominoes, blockbusters that I think all of us are hoping for that aren't Wizard fans.
Yeah, usually I'd agree too. I'm not a big fan of teams being stuck in the middle either, just because, you're going to fall to the bottom of the standings. But I think they were in a unique spot because of Beal. If they did just, try to, bottom out, then they'd surely have to trade him or he'd demand a trade. So I think the fact that, clearly they were trying to make the kind of moves that would keep him happy, going after certain guys that he's close with and keeping the team competitive. It's pretty interesting. I think they had to do it to kind of keep him happy. But the question is though, they could trade Beal before his value plummets, and that's always an option too. If you are, wanting to go the bottom out, get top picks and get more assets. Because right now they could get a ton if they really wanted to trade Beal, because especially when he's not demanding a trade, he's not, it is tough as he kind of comes up the end of that contract. Are they going to regret not trading him because, he could just walk somewhere next offseason? That could be something that's difficult. Or at this, this trade deadline, if he only has, a few months left on his deal and he's not committed anywhere long-term, maybe they do regret that. But there's also talk, Jake Fisher on my podcast, I mentioned him again from Bleacher Report. He's been killing it during this, free agent.
He's been killing it this offseason.
It's awesome. Leading up to the draft, he was breaking stuff. Yeah. He had tons of rumors that were accurate. So props to Jake Fisher. We had him on yesterday, and he was fantastic. But on my podcast, he said he thinks Beal's actually going to sign a supermax with Washington and have a 5-year deal. So he could see him staying there even longer. So that's another reason why, I'm sure this offseason they want to be aggressive and hope that he re-signs on a long-term deal or signs an extension. So pretty interesting. one question that we're getting a lot in the chat is about the Lakers. We talked a little bit about the Lakers over the last few days when they were making different moves. Obviously, they've been very busy with the Russell Westbrook trade, then filling out their roster with a bunch of big names. Oh, we actually, real quick, we do have an update.
It's funny. I was going to mention that they're trading Chandler Hutchinson. He has $4 million guaranteed, so they were trying to unload that around draft.
So Wizards trading Chandler Hutchinson and a second-round pick to San Antonio. So that had been kind of rumored to clear some money. So that allows them to kind of do some of the stuff they've been talking about. So not a huge deal, but Hutchinson goes to San Antonio and they get a draft pick too. We see the Spurs are kind of doing exactly what Evan wrote about at Basketball News a few days ago. They're going after young players. They're trying to, hoard draft picks. Pretty smart. We haven't really seen that from San Antonio in the last decade or two, but here they are now going after a bunch of young players and picks.
Just really quickly on San Antonio, because I was just looking at the roster earlier today. Now you add in Chandler Hutchinson to the mix. They have 17 players in their roster, so there has to be a trade coming, or they're sending out someone else in this deal.
Interesting. Okay, let's get back to the Lakers. We're talking about them for a second. I meant to put that chat on the screen, or that quick comment. I put a different one up. But thoughts on the Lakers and what they did this offseason. Again, Russell Westbrook. There was a great article yesterday by Nikias Duncan at basketballnews.com kind of breaking down Westbrook and how he fits with LeBron and AD in this roster. We also saw them went out and, add Dwight Howard, Kendrick Nunn, Carmelo Anthony, Wayne Ellington, Trevor Ariza. They've been very active adding different players. Thoughts on what we saw from the Lakers this offseason?
Yeah, I think I didn't love the Russ trade. I think that kind of puts me in the majority. I thought going after Buddy Hield and use their assets would just be kind of a better fit. The idea of surrounding LeBron with three shooters is kind of proven to be successful. So I didn't love the Russ fit. I understand. Listen, I respect Russ's energy. I respect his enthusiasm. I respect the way he approaches the game. He's going to limit the wear and tear on LeBron by being a primary ball handler, a facilitator offensively. Hopefully get LeBron some rest and not cost the Lakers too many games in the standings. But that being said, post-Russ trade, I really like the way they've kind of fleshed out their roster. Obviously, they've had the advantage of having a superstar magnet in LeBron that attracts guys like Kendrick Nunn to take far below market value. Ellington's a shooter, and they've addressed some of their other needs. So I like what they've done post-Russ trade, certainly.
Yeah, I was shocked they were able to get, we talked about it yesterday, but get Malik Monk and Kendrick Nunn and some of these guys. We all kind of expected Dwight Howard, Carmelo Anthony, even a Trevor Ariza is not surprising. Some of those guys, we kind of anticipated. And I do love the Dwight move. We saw how effective he was the year before. They really missed his shot blocking this season. But to be able to go out there and, get Malik Monk and Kendrick Nunn, a guy who had bigger offers elsewhere, I thought that was a really, two really interesting pickups and guys that are still very, very young. So this team is, very, very old. Carmelo's 37, LeBron's 36, Marc Gasol's 36, Trevor Ariza's 36, Dwight and Ellington, Dwight's 35, Ellington's 33, and then even, Bazemore and Russ are 32. So to add some of those young guys, bring back THT, Nunn, Monk, it kind of helps even things out a little bit. Evan, what are your thoughts on what we saw from the Lakers this offseason?
Yeah, I really love what they've done so far. I know the Westbrook fit on the surface when they first made the move was a little bit of an interesting fit for all the wrong reasons because you don't have a lot of spacing on the floor. You have LeBron's an average three-point shooter, but AD is not really a pick and pop five. Russ, as we know, is a below-average three-point shooter. But you go out and get Wayne Ellington, Malik Monk, Carmelo, at Trevor Ariza, Kent Bazemore, just to name a few there, and you get Kendrick Nunn as well as a backup. These are guys that are all plus three-point shooters. They help space the floor for Westbrook and LeBron and AD to do damage on drives and go inside and really make their way, as we all know, as one of the better interior presences in the NBA when they get going and transition as well. So I really like what the Lakers have done. I think adding all these shooters is exactly what you need to do. But you're banking a lot on Anthony Davis and a lot on LeBron James to really hold up this defense because there's not a lot of really great defenders on this roster right now. It's a lot of subpar guys.
Yeah, just to update real quick, we do have an update on that San Antonio, Brooklyn, Washington deal. It actually, the Chandler Hutchinson thing is part of the Dinwiddie sign and trade. So that's now expanded to include 5 teams. So you have Washington, Brooklyn, San Antonio, and then the Lakers and Pacers are also involved. Their draft night trade that was agreed to but not yet completed is also going to be part of that sign and trade. So teams are kind of cobbling together all their deals and merging it into one. So it'll be interesting. I know there was a rumor that it could be up to 8 teams that end up being part of this Dinwiddie thing. We'll see if it keeps growing, but at the moment, it sounds like it's only 5. So Washington, Brooklyn, San Antonio, Indiana, and LA. So we'll see kind of what information comes about that, if there's any other details that pop up. Let's see. Evan, this is a question that you can answer. Some people said Gambo mentioned Paul Millsap and Hartenstein as third center for Phoenix. Do you see that as a possibility?
Yeah, Paul Millsap is someone that makes a lot of sense for the Suns. They have about half their mid-level exception remaining, around $4.5 million. If Millsap wants to be like the 8th or 9th man in the rotation, it makes a lot of sense. He can be a small ball 5. He can play the 4. He's a versatile defender still. He's expanded his three-point range over the last few years as well. I think Millsap does make a lot of sense for them. I've also heard names like they're thinking about bringing back guys like Etuan Moore, Langston Galloway, Frank Kaminsky on veteran minimum deals. So the Suns have around 3 spots left on their roster. They need to add another big for depth and another guard, I believe. But Millsap, if he wants to join the Suns on a cheaper deal around $4 to $5 million, that certainly makes a lot of sense to really bolster their bench.
For sure. This is an interesting one. Reggie Jackson's still out there. We saw he played so well during the postseason, and now he's still a free agent. And then the Kawhi thing is interesting. I don't know why it's taken this long. We kind of talked about that during the first show. There was the rumor from Chris Haynes that he might meet with other teams, which I said, if I'm a Clippers executive, terrifies me. You know, the fact that it wasn't just a done deal and all of a sudden now you're hearing, oh, he's going to meet with other teams and it's kind of dragging out. That's not the best sign. We know Kawhi does typically, you know, when he's been a free agent before, it's taken a bit longer. I think last time he was waiting about a week plus as he kind of met with teams and talked things out and stuff like that. But, you know, you look at this offseason, it didn't seem like there was that much to discuss. It was kind of like the Chris Paul deal. We kind of all knew going into it that he was going to re-sign with the Suns. And then sure enough, within 24 hours, they got it done. I'm surprised that it's taking this long for Kawhi. I don't think, if you're a Clippers fan, you should be panicking right now, to be clear, because there's really no other situation that he can go to where there's cap space. But it is strange that, he hasn't re-signed yet. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I think, listen, trying to predict what Kawhi Leonard's going to do is often an effort in futility. So, like you said, that there's, the teams don't have cap space to make an offer that would entice him to leave the Clippers. I think the biggest concern from a Clippers standpoint is probably him signing a 1+1, kind of rehabbing on the Clippers dime all season, potentially missing the entire year, entering free agency in 2022 healthy, and then signing a max contract to play somewhere else. So I think that's kind of the worst case scenario from a Clipper perspective.
I think Kawhi, if I'm not mistaken, I might be off on this, but I think next year would be his 10th NBA season. So if that's the case, maybe he can do a 1+1 and get even more money next offseason. If that's the case, that might be what Kawhi's going for. But I'd be shocked if he leaves the Clippers. This makes too much sense. You gave up so much to get Kawhi and Paul George there. I think Steve Ballmer's going to pay however much he needs to. He'll give him half of the ownership rights to the Clippers. Honestly, it means keeping Kawhi there.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Best free agent remaining is a question that's popped up. We kind of talked about the list earlier. I would probably say Kelly Oubre. He had a down year with Golden State, struggled shooting the ball, but we saw in Phoenix what he was capable of, and Washington. He's only 25 years old, so the potential is still there. I think he probably has a big bounce back season. It was a tough year for him, obviously, and I'm surprised he's still available. We kind of mentioned it that, Oubre is talking with the Warriors about possible sign and trade opportunities. So we could see a team jump in the mix and land him for more than the minimum or part of an exception. But yeah, he's who I would go with. Is there a different answer that you guys have?
Well, technically, obviously, Kawhi.
Yeah. No, Oubre's better. No, I'm just kidding.
But I think in addition to Oubre, Lauri Markkanen is restricted out there, and Schroeder are probably 2 other names I'd put in that conversation. Markkanen's a fascinating kind of player to me. I'm not sure where he ends up, but certainly some upside there.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I think Kelly Oubre is very intriguing. Covering him in Phoenix when he was there for a year and a half, he could be a legitimate number 2 option for a team that's trying to get going and a rebuild. He averaged 18 points per game at the Suns, really good 3-point shooter. He's obviously streaky in there, but he's a versatile defender as well. I don't know where Oubre goes, though, because Alex, you mentioned this yesterday, that it might just be a sign and trade option for Oubre as far as teams that really need him. So the market's pretty much dried out on Oubre. I think he was asked for too much money here in free agency. Lauri Markkanen, the same thing. I think he might have been asked for too much money to really entice any teams to go get him. And now he's kind of stuck in this situation with Chicago where he might have to go back there next year unless they find something for him. I could easily see him just taking the qualifying offer, be like the starting four, like the sixth man for them, and then just testing it out as an unrestricted free agent next year, because that Bulls team's really good. And if you add Markkanen back to the mix there, that makes him an even stronger contender.
Especially with Thad Young, moved out in the trade for DeRozan.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're going to need some floor help.
Yeah, some people mentioning Oubre to Milwaukee. I think like you said, either he goes to a team where you can kind of chase the ring and be on center, on national TV a lot and contribute for a playoff team, and then potentially try to get his payday, or he goes to a team that's up and coming where he can be that number 2 option and kind of showcase his game a lot. It'll be interesting to see what he decides. I'm curious. One name that we haven't really talked about is Thaddeus Young. You mentioned it. San Antonio has 17 players in their roster. I think the thought process is when they acquired Thad Young in that deal that they try to flip him because they are trying to go after young players and picks. So he's someone that whenever he's come up in trade rumors in the past few years, a ton of teams have shown interest in because he can kind of fit with every team. He's known for being a great locker room guy, leader, very versatile. I think he's someone that, plenty of contenders would love to get their hands on. He's the guy that if he was a free agent right now, we'd probably be talking about him as the best guy available on the board. So thoughts on Thaddeus Young and possible landing spots or just what he brings to a team?
Well, yeah, I think you could argue that he was potentially more valuable to the Bulls this last season and this season than DeRozan would have been at a far more, valuable contract, a far more team-friendly contract. So yes, without question, I think I assume the Spurs will hold on to him for another couple months, rest them a little bit here and there, give him the old DMP and then at the deadline, put him out for best. I wouldn't be surprised at all if a team was willing to, trade a late first round pick or a young player, because he's the type of guy that, provides that defensive versatility in the front court, efficient offensively that, could be kind of that missing piece. Similar to how PJ Tucker was for the Bucks, a team could definitely view Thad Young as that type of player for them as they make a push towards the finals, ideally.
You just mentioned it, Tommy. I think they just lost PJ Tucker. I mean, I have to imagine John Horst might be calling San Antonio to try to get Thaddeus Young on board to replace PJ Tucker. That makes an awful lot of sense. He can guard 3 positions. He can stretch the floor and shoot it really well. Great team leader, great facilitator, is a big as well. Really, any contender that wants to make a big push this year needs to be calling San Antonio, because I think that there could be a bidding war out there pretty soon for a guy like Thad Young.
Yep.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mentioned this on the show, I think yesterday, but I interviewed Thad Young, I think 3 or 4 months ago, and it was right after the Bulls made all those different moves to trade. So I guess back in March, and he talked about just his role in that team as kind of a leader, and he was instrumental. And Zach LaVine mentions this too, in kind of helping Zach take that next step and knowing when to look for a shot, when to pass. There were games where Zach wasn't, pushing as hard, being as aggressive, and Thad would get on him, and then suddenly he's out there scoring tons of points. So he is great off the court too, helping younger players and helping guys reach their full potential. So yeah, I mean, there's plenty of teams out there that I'm sure are calling the Spurs right now about Thad Young. And if they do hold on to him, he's one of those guys that I'm sure if we do our trade deadline show, we'll be talking about him, at the deadline. Let's see. Anyone else have questions? Feel free to drop them there in the comments. I also do want to thank our sponsor, Panini. Panini is the exclusive trading card partner of the NBA. You can get Panini NBA trading cards featuring all of the league's top players, including rookies and free agents on the move, at Walmart, Target, hobby stores nationwide, and online at panini.net. So thanks to Panini for sponsoring this. Again, if anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat. We did talk about Lamarcus already a bit. We also talked about Miami's additions. Let's see. Any more questions? Oh, that's a good one. Do we expect the Warriors to do more? We haven't really talked about the Warriors very much. Obviously, their big offseason addition is getting Klay Thompson back from injury. And then Otto Porter Jr., I love that addition. Getting him on a minimum contract when he was getting mid-level exception type offers from other teams, that's huge for them. I think he's the kind of guy who his contract has overshadowed his contributions for several years now, but we saw he shot over 40% from 3, and he's been amazing in those catch and shoot opportunities. So he should be able to thrive next to Steph and Klay and Draymond, just getting open shots all day. I think he can maybe do what they thought Kelly Oubre was going to provide, knock down open shots and he's pretty solid defensively too. So there were a lot of teams that were kind of in the mix for Otto Porter, and for them to land him on that minimum deal, it just shows how much people want to play with his core. Hopefully it looks like Klay Thompson, and the injuries haven't affected him too much. We know Steph Curry is still a monster based on what we saw last season, signed a big extension. So, happy for him getting that 200 million plus. And then Draymond is still, capable of being a great defender. So and then hopefully we'll see, step forward from James Wiseman. Andrew Wiggins has another year in that system and, continuity chemistry with guys. So what are you guys' thoughts on the Warriors and what we saw from them?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the X factors, Wiseman. Well, obviously Klay. We'll see what he can come back. But if he can stand, if he can walk, he'll be able to shoot and contribute. But yeah, does Wiseman kind of take that next step forward? Because I'm sure there were conversations in that Warriors draft room. Do we trade 7-14 and Wiseman for? They could have got a star. If they wanted to compete this year and make the most out of Steph's prime. But it looks like they came to the conclusion that Wiseman is a guy that they can count on and contribute over the next couple seasons, almost immediately, because Steph isn't getting any younger, Klay isn't getting any younger, Draymond. If they want to make another run with that core, you kind of know what you're going to get from Wiggins, good and bad. Can Wiseman or one of the two kids that they drafted this year come in and make an impact and kind of change the trajectory of that team going forward immediately?
Yeah, I feel like honestly the Warriors are just one big move away from really making a push to be a title contender again this year. I keep thinking back to like a Miles Turner type who could really make a lot of sense for them in Golden State. They had the Wiggins contract. They have these young guys. They're kind of trying to balance win now with developing. And you just signed Steph to a huge extension for another 4 years. I think these next 4 years are where your window is right now for the Warriors to make another title push. So I do wonder if you try to cobble together some assets. They did trade Eric Pascal in a salary dump today. They waived a couple of their non-guaranteed guys as well. So I do wonder if the Warriors are trying to cut money or trying to make some room for maybe a push for a guy like Miles Turner or someone else. I know someone in the comments saying Ben Simmons for Warriors maybe potentially. So I do wonder what Golden State does because it feels like there's one move away.
Yeah, let's talk about Ben Simmons. We did an article at basketballnews.com about, what the Sixers should do with Simmons and kind of what their approach should be. My take was that you should never trade a player when their value's at an all-time low. And I think right now NBA Twitter is bashing Simmons and valuing him less than NBA executives are. I think that they're fans and NBA Twitter tend to do that. Just look at the guy's most recent play and just say, oh, he's awful. And, you shouldn't trade him for anything. I do think that the Sixers asking price has been kind of crazy. Asking for 4 first-round picks is kind of nuts. But this is a guy that was, runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year. He's one of the better defenders in the NBA. He's 25 years old. He's been a multi-time All-Star. And he impacts the game in many ways without trying to score the ball and shoot the ball. So there's no question his postseason performance was awful. But if I'm the Sixers, I'm having him start the season on the team and remind people that he's a dominant defender. Let him have a few performances and then see if that does help his stock a bit and then try to trade him. Now, is that going to be extremely awkward during training camp and the start of the season when you had guys like Embiid and Doc Rivers throwing him to the bus? Yes, that's going to be very weird. But I just wouldn't trade him for pennies on the dollar. And that's what it seems like most teams are offering right now based on all the reports. So they're in a tough position. They probably regret not trading him, sooner. But I just think it's right now. I wouldn't settle for one of these bad deals just so you can avoid the awkward situation in training camp. I would wait until, one of these teams increases their asking price because there's been plenty of interest in him, based on everything we're seeing. It's just teams don't want to give up, all those assets. So it's interesting. But if I'm the Sixers, I hold on to him until the trade deadline and see if any offers improve. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I definitely think it makes sense to hold on to him to the deadline. The other thing you mentioned, his age, defensive capabilities. He's locked into a 4-year deal. He's got 4 more years on his contract. That's very appealing to a small market team that's going to have trouble attracting a first, an All NBA type talent, a perennial All Star type talent, and that's kind of what Simmons brings to the table. But I would kind of counter and say that you don't want to trade somebody at their rock bottom price, but is this his rock bottom? This is a guy that shot 36% from the free throw line. If he doesn't kind of address that, there's obviously a mental block there. Will it get better if he misses some? If he goes 1 for 7 in its first game, will it get worse? Is he going to become, more willing shooter? I don't know. Maybe he needs a change of scenery. So you're obviously not going to get $1, 95 cents in the dollar that you could have gotten 6 months ago. But if you maybe you get 80 cents in the dollar now, and you get 70 cents or 65 cents of the dollar in February, those are kind of the things that I'm going to weigh. So I can really consider, moving him right now. But I totally understand the idea of wanting to avoid trading somebody when their value is really that low.
I'm still intrigued, honestly, just by Ben Simmons, what he could be in a different system. Because I feel like he could be, I'm not saying he could be like a MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo type of player, but just surround him with shooters, have him play your pseudo big point guard, and just have him be like Giannis, run in transition, get to the rim. He's a great finisher around the rim. Maybe just spread the floor for him. I think that's not going to happen in Philadelphia with Embiid clogging the paint a little bit. I just don't know if I like the fit with Simmons and Embiid moving forward. I don't even know if Simmons still wants to be in Philadelphia, because Jake Fisher did mention earlier this week that they're having difficulty contacting Ben Simmons. Philadelphia is. So I do wonder if that relationship's just broken at this point. And I just want to see Simmons somewhere where he can be in a situation where he's the number one guy. Probably just a tanking team for a year or two. But I do think Ben Simmons can still really up his value, but I don't know if it's going to be in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it is interesting, the fact that we're hearing the relationship's been, basically there's no communication. They can't get a hold of him. So that's definitely something to watch. That's something that, my plan sounds great. Oh, let him come to camp, play really well, and trade him. But if they can't get a hold of the guy and the relationship is deteriorated that much, maybe that's not going to work out. Let's see. Interesting news here. This is a good point. Imani Bates reclassified so he can go college route or G League. And I believe he gave his list of teams that he is open to, that he's looking at in college. Let me try to pull that up here. I believe Oregon was one of them. So he's looking at Oregon, Memphis, or Michigan State if he goes the college route, or he might go G League. So obviously a player we've been hearing about for several years now. People call him the next Kevin Durant, things like that. He's been, a beast at the high school level. Thoughts on this? I think the G League professional path is going to be even more and more popular over the next few years. Especially this year, you have Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, Isaiah Todd, 3 guys going in the top 31 picks. That only makes it even more appealing for high school guys that, want to just play basketball and learn those off the court skills and everything. Thoughts on, the G League path and what this could mean for Bates?
I totally would have agreed with you about 3 weeks ago, but with the Supreme Court passing that NIL legislation, the Alabama quarterback is getting $1 million in endorsements. We can, what's his name? The kid that played with Bronny James signed a $2 million endorsement deal. I forget his name off the top, but yeah, I think going to, an Imani Bates goes to a place like Michigan or UCLA or Duke or UNC, whatever it is, he could be looking at $1 million in endorsements. If he chooses to go that route, would be very interesting. But yeah, I think the new legislation kind of changes that playing field. But certainly the G League did have some success this year, and I think NBA execs would prefer that they kind of get him in-house and have a closer look at him. So it would be very interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Alex, just the competition in the G League compared to college, I think is just a huge step forward. We saw guys like Jalen Green and Kuminga thrive in that area, and they both went in the top 7. And if Imani Bates were to go to the G League, right, he'd still get over $500,000 if he were to go that direction. So I think if I'm Imani Bates, I would lean towards the G League Ignite route, just because we've seen it already in year 1 how well they've done. And like that system, I think, is really built for these young guys to really develop within 1 year. But like you mentioned as well, Tommy, the NIL deal really does change things, where it is a legitimate discussion and debate probably for these guys now what to do.
For sure. All right. We're going to hang out here for about 10 more minutes. So if you guys have any questions, be sure to get them in. Here's one topic that we kind of talked about briefly the other day, but Blazers and what they should do. Should they trade CJ McCollum? We talked about, Damian Lillard's been on the record saying he doesn't think this is a championship roster. They really have only made minor moves. So it'll be interesting to see what Portland does. I know a lot of Blazer fans are upset right now just with the lack of movement, and I'm curious, what do you guys think we're going to see from the Blazers? Do they wait till Dame Lillard's back from the Olympics and tell him, hey, we're going to try to give this roster one more chance and not really make big moves? Do we see them make a big trade? What do you guys think we're going to see from the Blazers?
Well, circling back, we talked a little bit about Ben Simmons, and I always thought that CJ McCollum for Ben Simmons, was kind of the two focal points in a trade made a lot of sense for both teams. Yeah, Dame kind of basically, which talk about awkward situations at training camp. He said, "Listen, my teammates aren't good enough to win at the level I want to win at." So that kind of needs to change. And I don't think Cody Zeller is what he had in mind. They brought back Norm Powell, but at big money. So we'll see how it changes. But I think the Blazers, should try to pursue. I think that CJ McCollum Dame backcourt has kind of gone as far as it can go. We'll see if they shake it up, at the start of the season at the deadline. But I'd be surprised if they end the season with both those guys on the same squad.
What's really interesting to me, I'm actually working on a Blazers story for basketballnews.com, and I was totally against the CJ Powell and Dame trio, but dive into the advanced numbers, over 400 minutes that not only did Powell, Lillard, and McCollum, and add in Covington and Nurkic, that five-man unit was actually plus 14 per 100 possessions. It was one of the best five-man units in the NBA last season when Powell joined them. So I do wonder if they try to run that back. Injuries really did derail them last year, but I think CJ McCollum should be traded. I think Norman Powell takes that role on for him pretty easily. They need more wing depth. They need just more versatility around Damian Lillard. This is their last chance to keep Lillard around, because I could easily see next offseason or even before that, Lillard wants to go to the Knicks or some other big market where there's a lot of teams out there that want to get Lillard. But I think this is Portland's last stand, so to say.
For sure. It will be interesting to see what happens there. Pretty wild situation. Let's see. Some people asking about Pascal Siakam. We talked about that for a while. I think the Siakam situation is pretty interesting. I was surprised that his name was popping up in rumors at all leading up to the draft. And then they draft Scotty Barnes. And apparently, according to Jake Fisher and Mark Stein and some others, that has teams thinking that they're even more intent on trading Pascal Siakam. There was a great article on basketballnews.com about, his game and just why you should throw away this last season. It was a weird year with everything that kind of went on, and they think he's going to have a huge bounce back season and remind everyone that he was a number 2, number 3 option on a championship team and a great player. So I think Siakam is still young enough and could bounce back and have an awesome year. So I'm surprised that they're talking to teams or open to trading him, but we'll see what happens there. Let's see. Any other situations that you guys want to touch on? Any teams that jump out at you that we haven't discussed? Any players that you guys want to get into before you sign off?
I think one is just John Collins. He signed his extension today with Atlanta finally. 5 years, $125 million. There was just, I think, a back and forth there. Collins wanted near max money. He instead gets a $25 million deal over the next 5 years. I think it's a great deal for both sides. Atlanta still has flexibility down the road after getting Trae Young's max contract done. They just made the Eastern Conference Finals, so I do just wonder at this point how Atlanta's core continues to develop together.
Yeah, for sure. We talked about that. It makes sense for him to budge and not ask for that max deal. There was no other team out there that can give him the kind of offer sheet that he wanted. So he really had to just take that Atlanta offer and be happy. Unfortunately for him, restricted free agency kind of sucks, but that's the case. So he still got tons of money. It worked out for both sides. Let's see. I think that's pretty much everything. We kind of went around the entire league and talked about everything. We appreciate everyone hanging out with us. Again, thanks to Panini. Panini America is continuing to release digital trading cards on its Panini NFT blockchain platform, which includes the signature Panini Prism basketball line. Check out PaniniAmerica.net to start collecting Panini NFT blockchain cards featuring all of your favorite NBA players. So thanks to Panini for sponsoring this. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about hopefully Dennis Schroeder and Kelly Oubre and some of these guys that haven't signed yet. We're hoping that happens pretty soon, so we have some more stuff to talk about tomorrow. So definitely jump back in with us tomorrow and ask your questions, throw some comments in the chat, and we'll try to talk about them. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us. We appreciate it. Take care.